Geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, fans of the comic book medium, the ninth art, the world over. Welcome to Ask Chuck Dixon, where you get to ask me, a seasoned, well renowned, globally famous comic book institution, to be frank, Chuck Dixon, about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. So let's jump right in here. Nathan Mercer 9048. Hey, Chuck, hopefully you see this. If you were to make a universe from scratch, what would you do to keep everything cohesive? To be fair, let's say a superhero universe. Well, um, I know attempts have been made in the past to design universes, you know, as part of like a committee deal. I mean, that's what they did at CrossGen, where there were all these binders full of the details about the CrossGen universe and all that. I never read any of them, but superhero continuities, comic book continuities, they can be messy and strange and whatever, which is why so many reboots and whatever. Well, I don't think reboots and restarts and all the rest are required. You ignore the parts of continuity you don't like, and keep the ones you do like. I think in all of our own heads, we have our own continuity, where things that happened in the past that didn't happen. In my world, that didn't happen. In my own continuity, in my head. So the only way to build a continuity is from the ground up. What story requirements are there here? Because if you try to nail down everything ahead of time, you're restricting your creators. You're restricting the kind of story they can tell. You're also making them constantly think twice. Does this fit in with continuity? What the most important thing at the beginning is to set your tone. Is this going to be a dark universe? Is this going to be a blue sky universe full of optimism? Are the stories going to be, somewhat grounded in reality, entirely fantasy, whatever. So you set those kind of ground rules, and then you just let your storytellers tell stories, and then allow them to work out the continuity. What's important in this world, what is not important, to build. And then after a while, you all got to get together and compare notes. Make sure everybody's on the same page. And usually whoever created a character or an ensemble group, they're in charge of that portion of the continuity, and they get to run that part of the show. Green Lantern's a great example. Green Lantern has its own dense continuity, which oftentimes is outside of the rest of the DC universe, because the Lantern Corps and their world, it's in space, and it's can expand to wherever. Doesn't always have to impact Earth. Doesn't always have to impact the Justice League or Apocalypse or New Genesis or Bizarro World, whatever. It's its own continuity, much as segregated from the rest for the large part. That's the way most of Batman continuity is segregated from the rest of DC continuity. And as we see, these continuities can just be thrown out the window on a heartbeat. So maybe everything you love no longer exists, and you kind of have to, where you set your computer back to a time before you had the current problem you're having. You can set your own continuity back. I mean, for me, as a recovering Star Wars fan, I set my Star Wars continuity back to when they left Jabba's lair at the beginning of Return of the Jedi, and to me, nothing else ever happened after that was worthy of note. So now, with the Rippaverse, I'm actively involved in building a universe. Other creators are handling other segments of the Rippaverse, while I'm handling Alpha Core. But I'm also I've just completed a two-part project that goes back into the history of the Rippaverse. So there, I'm establishing a lot of continuity that others are going to have to follow. But at the same time, the Saska sisters and Mike Baron are creating their own continuity that I'm going to follow and I'm going to reference in the future. And we do have, the Zoom calls every now and again that we all get onto, and we compare notes. And we're all reading each other's work as we go along. And it's early days. But like I said, these continuity contributions are story driven. It's not Eric saying, this is this and that is that. He gives this very, very general idea of what the Rippaverse world looks like in his mind. And he's very open to, well, let's throw that out if it gets in the way of this story. Let's change it up now. We'll change it now so that it's canon, so it's continuity. And it seems like we always meant to do that. Going back to Star Wars, I would argue that a lot of Star Wars continuity was not thought up ahead of time. I really don't think that George Lucas went into the first Star Wars movie thinking, what if Darth Vader was Luke Skywalker's father? I really don't believe that he had those plans, because he didn't seem to be setting anything like that up in the first film. That all seems to come along in the second movie. But like I said, these things evolve and they change and they shift. But the thing about it is, when you create a continuity, when you create this stuff, you have to think, do I want to live with this forever? When Batman had a son, did I really want to do that? And I remember Commissioner Gordon had a son as well, and we just sort of ignored him. And you have little things in the Bat universe, like Ace the Bat Hound. He was around, and then he wasn't, because we just sort of he's kind of useless, or he's not getting. There's no story thing here. Best example, we killed off Commissioner Gordon's wife, Sarah Essen, simply because her story was over. She was an appendage, an unwanted appendage to the stories. As cruel as that sounds, I'm sure she had her fans, but there was no more story to tell about Sarah Essen. It was pretty much over, and she was kind of getting in the way of telling good stories. So, these things all move along. It's a it's a river, the continuity, and sometimes it takes some strange bends. But yeah, but I would caution anybody building a universe, unless it's like something you're writing all on your own, all by yourself, and that's your process, is figuring everything out ahead of time. If you're going to write a shared universe that other creators are going to be involved with, I would say lay it down as vague as possible. Just say, look, this is the tone. These are the goals. This is what the universe is about. This is what our big story, or all of our stories, should reflect upon. But let's leave the details up to the rest of you and see what you come up with, because therein, lies the stories. Daryl Herrick. Recently reading World War II Black Hawk combat stories from 1940s quality comics, I wondered how you would have handled them. While the stereotypes are objectionable, the stories had the fervency of a country at war. The raw emotion likely reflected what people on the home front were feeling. When dealing with the real war, what approach do you take with, when you're dealing with real war, what approach do you take with the narrative tone and portrayal of the emotions of the combatants? Well, here, hold on. I got to adjust something here. Boom. In the case of Black Hawk, and in the case of, Captain America and the Human Torch and Captain Marvel, they had them fighting Nazis. They had them fighting the Japanese. And because that was in the headlines, that was the bad guy. These were the bad guys. And, Black Hawk and other, war adventure type characters, and even superhero characters, that was the feeling at the time. America wanted, basically revenge for being, ambushed, or a surprise attack at Pearl Harbor. People were pretty ticked off about that. I remember my grandmother was mad about that to the day she passed. Uh, so, you know, how would I have handled? You're asking me how I would have handled it. I mean, back then, I mean, I guess the same way. I would have shared people's anger and frustration at what was going on, and America's impatience for the military to strike back at our enemies. But you know, there were a lot of characters like this back then. I mean, in newspaper strips and comics, and in the pulps and in the movies, you had these, uh, these heroic figures, uh, basically from another age. Because as we learn about World War II, as the American public experienced World War II, they realized the dire circumstances, the horrible things that were happening, and the public mood changed to where we don't want these kind of rah rah stories anymore. We want the sacrifice of our young men, and in many cases women, to be recognized, not some bulletproof hero standing on a hill saying, come on, boys. The American public got swiftly tired of that, and the filmmakers realized, we can't pander to them anymore. They're not, it's not fair to people getting letters from the government, telling that a loved one has passed, to keep presenting these kind of, exploitative, heroic fantasies. And so the movies had to grow up, and I don't think the comics ever really did until the Korean conflict, when the war comics all sort of grew up into another phase. Now, as far as writing about real war, I try to acknowledge what soldiers go through in combat. I read a lot. I'm not one of these guys who reads military history from the general's point of view. That doesn't interest me. I want to read about the experience on the ground. What does that guy, downrange, the guy with his finger on the trigger, what's he experiencing? And I've always, even when I was a kid, I've always been fascinated to talk with veterans. People that have been in the service, people that have been in the service and in combat, and all the way up to Iraq and Afghanistan. When I was working on G.I. Joe, I did a lot of convention and store appearances, and I was lucky enough to speak to a lot of young men and women back from Afghanistan and Iraq, who were G.I. Joe fans, who were there to have their G.I. Joe comics signed because they joined the military because of G.I. Joe. An awful lot of G.I. Joe fans in the military. And so I would, be honored that, I would ask them questions. And never think anything as tasteless as what's combat like. I would ask them about what's an MRE taste like, what are those forward bases like in Afghanistan? They look pretty miserable. And, I just heard some just amazing stories. And I try to be true to that, and also I'm listening as they talk, to hear how they talk. And even more importantly, how they talk to each other. And I try to capture that, because I feel that that's, and I've been told by people that have served that I'm pretty good at that. I'm pretty good at listening and getting the patois down, because I don't want to use movie cliches. I don't want to rely on that. I want the dialogue to seem fresh and real and immediate, and I can only get that by actually, talking to men and women who were there and experienced it, and they tell me in their own words. I read a lot of first person accounts. There's a lot of awesome compilations of first person accounts of being in war zones, and I just gobble them up like popcorn, because it just fascinates me, what goes through the mind, the emotional, intellectual changes, the decisions a person makes under that level of stress. And and you got to wonder, how would I have reacted in that situation? Okay, if you subscribe, thank you. If you haven't, please do. YouTube is fooling around with my numbers, something crazy. I every time I get ahead a little bit, they drag me back down a bunch of subscribers. I've been told this is because somehow your subscription can run out or expire and you need to resubscribe. I don't know why that would be, but apparently that is the case. So if you could hit that subscription button, if you haven't subscribed already, if you have or you think you've subscribed, double check. Make sure you're still subscribed to this channel, because it does an awful lot to help me build an audience here and get more and more of your fantastic questions like this one. Jeff Moss, have you read any of Vince Flynn's Mitch Rapp series? If so, what are your thoughts and how would you compare Rapp to Levon Cade? I have never read any Mitch Rapp. I have never read any Jack Reacher, because I'm in that same space. I'm writing this vigilante justice loner character on my own. This tough guy, this rough guy who takes care of business, who has his own personal code of justice. And I don't want anybody else's thoughts in that arena in my head. So I've never read them. I'm coming off of, Levon comes off of my Punisher itch. And it also comes off of, all the 70s men's adventure, men's action paperbacks I read when I was younger. And I'm kind of coming off of them. I'm coming off of a little bit of Richard Stark's character Parker. And I'm trying to write something more grounded in reality. Now, I don't know, since I've never read Flynn or the Jack Reacher books, I don't know how grounded or ungrounded in reality those books are. But I try to make it so that Levon's world seems real, and also play a lot with plot templates and things like that. I mean, I'm not telling the same story over and over again. Trying to find different ways to get Levon into the story. Different action tropes. I'll write, one will be a war story, one will be a prison story, one will be a chase story, one will be a heist story, one will be a Die Hard kind of story. So, but yeah, I don't read any of that other stuff because I don't want it in my head. I'm not putting any of it down. Maybe it's wonderful. Maybe I'm really missing. Well, apparently I am missing out on something, because those books are all enormously successful. But maybe one day. Nick Capello, hey Nick, in your own opinion, what was the worst Batman storyline? Oh, Killing Joke. It's Killing Joke. It's the worst. It changed Batman. Well, it didn't change Batman forever, because there were still writers, including me and Alan Grant and Kelly Puckett and Doug Mensch, who post, and Scott Peterson, who post Killing Joke wrote good Batman stories, traditional Batman stories. But the problem is that Killing Joke inspired a new generation of Batman writers to try to continue writing the kind of dark, dismal, pessimistic, noirish, perverse stories like The Killing Joke. They tried to be, all tried to be little Alan Moores. And from my understanding in various interviews with Alan Moore that I've read, he regrets the effect. He doesn't regret writing The Killing Joke. I think he had to get it out of his system or something. It's like some kind of therapy. But he regrets the effect it had, largely on the Batman universe following The Killing Joke. Fortunately, we had Denny O'Neil in charge of things. We had Denny O'Neil at the wheel in the 90s, and he didn't like The Killing Joke any better than the rest of us. He was not involved with the publication Killing Joke. So, he was steering the ship, and we were doing traditional, normal Batman stories that the kids could read. But for my money, that's the worst. Now, I never read Kevin Smith's story where Batman wets himself, but that would probably be worst Batman story number 2. Neil Matthews, what Punisher story, please, that you have written that has not been collected into trade would you like to see? Well, so many of my Punisher stories have not been printed. I mean, most of them, the vast majority of the 85, I think, issues and graphic novels and stuff of Punisher I've written have never been collected. And but this is the one I'd like to see collected. Don Daly kind of unleashed Gary Quapis and I on Punisher War Journal, and we just went wild. We were handing in issues ahead of schedule. We were Gary was. I'm always beating my deadlines, but Gary was beating the art deadlines by like 30 days, 60 days, at one point 90 days. We just got on a tear with this book. And just had a lot of fun because I knew Gary would draw any crazy thing I asked him to draw, and draw it with his usual fervor and skill. And this group of books contains one of my favorite Punisher arcs, where Punisher basically goes up against a family of unreconstructed hillbillies who have moved into New York, and I forget if they were making crack. It might have been a little too early for crystal meth, but whatever. They got involved in the drug trade, and of course that brought them head to head against the already established drug gangs in the city. So you had this gang war that Frank not only gets in the middle of, but encourages. And it all climaxes with even Frank realized the odds he was up against, and he has Microsoft build him an exoskeleton, an armored exoskeleton, so he can be something like Iron Man. But of course, it's micro, and there's not a lot of money. They don't have Tony Stark's billions of dollars, and so it's sort of a low rent exoskeleton you'd buy with parts you bought at Home Depot, and it malfunctions at the worst possible moment. And I just love the story because it was just so goofy, so off the wall. We had a couple of recurring corrupt cop characters. I mean, it's just sleazy, goofy, gonzo action fun. Just 1980s action movie craziness, and I love it. I wish they would republish it, because I just wish it would have a larger audience. Mick Dundee, what was it like working with Stallone on something so near and dear to him as the Rambo Legacy? Well, he just kind of let me go crazy. I mean, I told him, and we'd already, with Richard Meyer, we had already done The Expendables Go to Hell. So, I mean, I had Sly's trust, and then Richard had Sly's trust, because Expendables Go to Hell was very successful. And Sly was very happy with it. And he knew we were earnest. Well, he knew I was earnest because we talked quite a bit beforehand. But he knew Richard was earnest, which he should have, because Richard was like the biggest Expendables fan on the planet Earth, and also big Rambo fan. So he knew we weren't going to phone it in. We weren't going to goof off on it. We were serious. We were as serious as he was presenting a good Rambo story. And he liked the idea that we were going to start with Rambo as a high school student, and show basically how he becomes the character that we would know later on. And he just left us alone. I mean, I sent him the script when it was done, and I didn't get any notes back. So he was very, very happy with it. And I know it's either at the printers or the books are back. Richard tends to gang fulfill. He's had a lot of projects boiling that are complete. And Rock and Roll Ninjas just came out. That just fulfilled. And I think Rambo First Kill is next in line. I mean, honestly, I'm expecting any day to go out to the mailbox and see my comps there. So fulfillment is on the way for Rambo First Kill. I think it's still available in demand. And it's Rambo's first tour in Vietnam. And as I said, starts with him as a high school student in Arizona who was forced to enlist in the Army. He has a choice of enlisting in the Army or going to jail. And he picks what he sees as the lesser of two evils. Okay. Harding McFadden, what would you say are the A-list horror titles of all time? Well, I immediately jumped to Bride of Frankenstein, but was that an A-list picture? Because even though it looks great, Universal was not an A-list studio at the time. Universal was a double feature, second feature programmer house for a very, very long time. all the way into the 50s. They were, Universal, I'm just talking off the top of my head here. Universal really doesn't come into its own as a big producer of filmed entertainment until television comes along. And Universal is a big player in the sphere of television. And they begin to more and more take their, line of movies more and more seriously. So although Bride of Frankenstein looks great and is awesome, earnest entertainment, it's still not an A picture. It's a B picture. It's a really great looking B picture, but it's not that. Now, hands down, the greatest A horror film ever made is The Exorcist. And I got to tell you something funny about. We've all seen this poster. We've all seen this image. My oldest son was at a trivia contest, and only the art for this poster was shown, and the audience and the players were told, this is art from a movie poster. Name the movie, and almost everyone said Singing in the Rain. My son, who is a cinemaphile beyond compare, obviously knew it was The Exorcist. And not no surprise to my wife or I, he said he swept the film category. He answered all the questions, killed on it. But anyway, The Exorcist is it's definitely the scariest A picture ever made, and it really is. It is an A picture. Warner Brothers put a lot of money into it. This is, for the time period, this is a very, very expensive movie to make, and the studio put everything behind it, and they put an awful lot of faith in the creators of the movie. They somehow sensed. Now they couldn't have had any idea how successful it would be, but they had faith that it would have legs, that a lot of people would see it, that there was a lot of curiosity, a lot of anticipation for the release of this movie, because the book had caused a sensation. Everybody was talking about it, and they thought it would be huge. And the degree to which they backed William Friedkin is extraordinary. Friedkin was upset with the first prints he saw of the movies. The color was all off, nothing was right. And if you've ever read anything about William Friedkin, he was a bug on color. He said, "This is not the color I wanted. It doesn't look right at all. It doesn't." He wanted a kind of a documentary. If you remember the film at all, sort of a documentary feel. He wanted an immediacy to this movie. Like you were in the room with these people, and what he was getting back was movie colors. And he didn't want movie colors. He wanted like documentary film colors, natural lighting, all the rest. And he actually convinced Warner's to have the negative sent to a different lab at an enormous expense. And it was all done in a different lab, and became much, much closer to what Friedkin wanted. And of course, the complications of the shoot were legendary. Illnesses and accidents and all the rest of it that put the schedule way behind. This film ran way over budget, way over schedule. But of course, the results for Warner Brothers were freaking astounding. I mean, this movie was a mega hit. It was huge. I remember standing in line for 3 hours to see this movie, because every show was sold out. Every show was sold out. And, so yeah, definitely The Exorcist. But I got to give honorable mention to Alien, which probably didn't have the kind of studio backing Exorcist had its own problems in filming and all the rest, but it's definitely an A picture made by an A studio. And the first real sign since The Exorcist that the studios were willing to move their A units into genre, like science fiction and horror, thanks to Star Wars. They started looking at what movies that only a few years before would have been considered drive-in fodder, and now they're looking at them as tentpole movies. They're looking at them as serious movies, like, yeah, hey, there's an audience for this crap. Well, there always was an audience for this crap, moron. You just didn't realize it. And the better you made it, the more of an audience there was. So I would give an honorable mention to Aliens as the second best horror picture ever made. J.W. Goulet, do you have any desire to write the next great American novel? Steve Martin once said, and I have it in front of me so I can read it every day. Steve Martin once said, entertainment can be art, but if you set out to make art, you're an idiot. And I agree. Anybody says I'm going to write the great American novel, they just want attention or a free meal or something. So, I don't have any pretensions to literature. I don't have pretensions to awards. None of that matters to me. What really matters to me is that you folks read what I write and like it. And you like it enough that you'll let me write more, because the real pleasure isn't in accolades or attention or reputation. The real pleasure in writing for me is sitting here writing, just sitting here making stuff up. And that's my living. And that's like, I'm a genre writer. I'm not writing a great American novel. I'm writing adventure. I'm writing science fiction. I'm writing, whatever. I'm writing Westerns. I mean, I've written 4 Westerns. In case you didn't know, I wrote these 2 Westerns under a house name, A.W. Hart. So written 4 Westerns. I'm working on a 5th right now. I'm going to finish that up real soon. And yeah, I'm a genre guy. Now, my only pretenses I've ever had was when I wrote the novel Shrinkage. It was my homage in my own head to the gold medal paperbacks of the 50s and 60s. And gold medal paperbacks were generally, like 160 pages long, and they were slice of life crime stuff, tough guy stuff, what's generally called hard boiled stories. And I really wanted to write Shrinkage as an homage to that kind of a crime novel. Shrinkage is about a shoplifter, a petty thief in Philadelphia in the 1970s. And that's really was my only pretense, which, is kind of a low bar. To me, it wasn't, because I think gold medal paperbacks were a high point for paperback originals. They had a tremendous reputation. I don't know if there's a history of gold medal paperbacks. I would read it in a heartbeat. Apparently, they had an editor who had incredible taste for stories and would help the authors out with pacing and characterization and everything else. So there was sort of not a house style, but a house level of quality for gold medal paperbacks that you had to reach. I mean, Donald Westlake could not get approved. He pitched a gold medal over and over and over again and could not get approved. And they weren't even the biggest paperback house. But if you were a writer, you wanted the prestige of being published by gold medal. And so, that's my only pretense. I'm just not built that way. I just, my mama didn't raise me to want that kind of attention. So, but as long as you folks read the stuff and like it and keep buying it and keep wanting to read it, I'm going to keep writing it. And even if you don't, I'm probably going to keep writing it because it makes me happy. Okay, that's it for this week. I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for watching. I want to especially thank you for subscribing and spread the word. Spread the word. Why don't you, let your friends know about this? Maybe provide some links in your social media to this particular episode if you care to. I'm trying to build this channel. I'm trying to get more attention on it. And because I think there's a lot of people out there that would enjoy it that simply don't know about it. And isn't that the story of the internet? Okay, well, that's it. Thank you, and I'll see you all down the road.